Internationally recognized as poet, novelist, educator, activist, leader, and proud ambassador and pioneer of African ideologies, our Nigerian born professor Chinua Achebe is indeed an African genius, and in this session, we share some of his views. Thanks once again for tuning in. Please support the channel by subscribing, liking, and hitting the bell notification button. And yes, your comments are always highly appreciated. Now let's jump right into it. In this episode, we will share Chinua Achebe's views to telling stories, his views on who an African writer actually is, how he views criticism versus how he views ignorance, how he views hearsay versus how he views experience, his views on a united Africa, how he recommends that all should have a teachable attitude, how memories are captured in stories, so he says, well, and so much more. So get yourself comfortable and prepare to receive some wisdom. Number one, according to Professor Chinua Achebe, the following is the reason why telling your own story is very important, especially in a society where the narrative is always adjusted to suit the one who is in power.
Well, it is a story that makes us human. And that's why we insist. Whenever we are in doubt about who we are, we go to stories, because this is one thing that we have done, the human race. There's no group that doesn't do it. It seems to be central to the very nature of, to the very, very fact of our humanity, to tell who we are, and to let that story keep us in mind of this, because there will be days when we are not quite sure whether we are human, or even more commonly, whether other people are human with us. It is in the story that we get this continuity of this affirmation that you are human and that your humanity is contingent on the humanity of your neighbor. So even though you live in one particular place, you look one particular way, you are not ultimately different from anybody else. You are different in certain superficial things, but you are not different in your humanity. Because ultimately, the story relates you, connects you to this great tradition to which you belong. It's vital that it should be kept alive. And it's not only, there are bad stories too. You see, because it's not only good people who make stories. Bad people make their own stories too. And the conversation between the bad and the good is also helpful to us. The bad stories should not be drowned out. It will simply be shown to be bad stories. False stories can only be shown to be false when they are told and they are placed beside others that are not, that are more truthful.
Absolutely, Professor Chinua Achebe. No such a thing as keeping stories untold, as they are not favored. Both good and bad stories can contribute to the effective education of our society. And now, moving on to number two, in answering the question, who is an African writer? This is what Professor Achebe had to say.
Who is an African writer? my own definition of an African writer. And it was a definition that the Israeli Prime Minister, the founding Prime Minister of Israel, used to define who is a Jew. Mm-hmm. And he said, anyone who wants to be a Jew, that's good enough for me. And that was my definition of an African writer.
So, as long as you will be careful to share a truthful account of African stories from the African perspective and not from a biased and stereotypical view, then according to Professor Chinua Achebe, you too can be an African writer, and happy writing. Moving on, number 3 on our list are Achebe's views on criticism versus ignorance. In an interview conducted by Bill Moyers, Professor Chinua Achebe shares views which support that criticism is always welcome, considering that people are different people, right? And will always have different views. The issue, however, arises when one looks down on the views of another person and uplifts their own views as universally correct. Unlike the Christianity religion, where it is taught that there is only one way, one truth, and one life, Professor Achebe argues that there are many ways and many truths and many ways of pursuing life. He does, however, also speak against the ignorance of people who view the whole world in light of their own limited understanding of life.
There is no one way to anything. There is no absolute anything. Even good things, they are against excess. Their world is a world of dualities. It is good to be brave, they say, but also remember that the coward survives the brave man. And so this is what it's saying.
So if you have your God, that's all right, because
yes.
There must be another God as well.
Yes, yes. If there is one God, fine, there will be others as well. If there is one point of view, fine, there will be a second point of view.
And number 4, hearsay versus experience. Professor Chinua Achebe warns against the assumption that knowing of what a person is going through equates to understanding what a person is going through. With this, he highlights that people should be considerate of others and not view others from the lens of their own life and experiences, but from the realistic lens of what other people actually go through. Let's listen to what he says.
There are things you can learn by hearsay. But there are other things you can't ever learn unless you have the experience. Fortunately, there are not too many such things, you see. I mean, you don't want to be run over by a train in order to know that trains kill people, you see. So it's good to learn that from hearsay. But the question of suffering, for instance, is not something that somebody should get completely by hearsay, because it's never the same thing, you see. And if one is in danger in quote, of getting away from suffering completely, I think one would be somehow deficient in the full realization of what our life is about. There's an old man in my village who was said to suffer from a very, very painful kind of infection in the finger called whitlow. Very, very painful. And when he had this, and, if you came along and said to him, "I'm sorry, sir," he will ask you, "Have you ever had it before?" And you say, no, I haven't. He said, go. No, God, you don't know how to, you can't really say anything to me. You see, you need first-hand knowledge, I think, in order to be well-grounded in what happens with suffering. And this is very important. And you learn that it is not just the other person who is made to suffer. You learn that it is not only the sinful people, the wrong people who suffer. That because we're all right in our own eyes. So it doesn't happen to somebody because of a crime they committed, or a crime that their people committed. All this, these are all possible ways of trying to explain suffering. It is his great-grandfather who did it. It's not that. That's not true.
Moving on to view number 5, the need for Africa to unite. Decades after the entire African continent was colonized, the plight of disunity still continues. Systems which were set in place by colonizers are still being continued, and even though many changes keep being implemented, the process of reversing all that was forced into the identity, the mindset, and the governing of Africa seems to continue to strengthen disunity in Africa. Professor Chinua Achebe highlights that we Africans have a lot more in common than what separates us, and that part of our growth, stability, and development lies in us uniting.
Africa is a very complex and big place. It's huge. So anything that attempts to make it, to cram it into one little box, will fail. There are things that unite us, big as the continent is. Our history, the history of Africa, has been almost the same everywhere. Africa is the only continent where practically every inch, every square inch, was colonized. You see, and so that is an experience that unites the continent, apart from earlier affinities that we may have. So there are areas in which we must work together, but there are areas also where the diversity must be recognized because it is necessary to acknowledge diversity. It's not only unity that is of importance. Diversity is also of great importance. In fact, we are now told by biologists, one of the moving factors of creation and survival, that we have as much diversity as possible.
A unity in our diversity, right, Professor Achebe? Right. Well, certain things we may need to learn, others we need to unlearn, and yet others we need to relearn. Let's learn to forgive one another, learn to understand one another, and learn to respect one another. Let's unlearn the hate we were taught and the flawed views of who is better than the other. And let's relearn to love one another, support one another, and to relate as fellow humanity in the sphere of existence. And number 6, a teachable spirit like kids.
We do need to learn, all of us, to learn to become like children again. Once in a while, we become so stiff. We're weighed down by so much knowledge, so much possession, so much special interest that we lose the ability, the flexibility of children. Children can fly. Everything is possible to a child. And this is something I think we ought to learn. Again, we ought to keep ourselves young in that particular way.
Storytelling has always been an important part of African culture. Grandparents were always known and appreciated for their storytelling. And in addition to how such were always pleasant memories or moments shared, there were also moments of transferring memories and life lessons from one generation to the next. Do you still remember some stories which your grandparents shared with you? Well, I know I still do. And on number 7, Professor Achebe discusses the importance of telling stories to preserve memories. Let's listen up.
Well, if you look at the world in terms of storytelling, you have the warrior, you have the war drummer, the man who drums up the people. First of all, the man who agitates the people. I call him the drummer. And then you have the warrior who goes forward, and fights. But you also have the storyteller who takes over to recount the event. And this is the one who survives, who outlives all the others. It is the storyteller, in fact, that makes us what we are, that creates history.
The memory.
Yes, the memory.
The continuity of the generation.
That's right, the memory which the survivors must have. Otherwise, their surviving would have no meaning.
And if you like this content, please take the time to subscribe, to like, to share our content, and press the bell notification button. And we always would love and appreciate to hear your views. Well, moving on to number 8. If you have taken the time to read any of Chinua Achebe's books, you will find that he challenges or he raises awareness of certain issues which a lot of people will view as rather sensitive. Issues such as gender inequalities, issues such as corruption in government, bribery, all such issues which a lot of people rather overlook. Well, let's hear his views on why he actually raises awareness of some of these rather sensitive issues. And number 8, do enjoy.
Sometimes our colleagues in the West suggest that perhaps we are too activist, we are too earnest, you see. Why don't you relax? This is not really the business of poetry. The point is this: a poet who sees poetry in the light in which I'm suggesting, is likely to fall out very seriously with the emperor, and whereas a poet in the West might say, oh no, we have no business with politics, we have no business with history, we have no business with anything, just what is in our own mind. The emperor would be very, very happy.
So that's what you meant when you said once that storytelling is a threat.
It is a threat.
A threat
yes.
to anyone in control.
Yes, because the storyteller has a different agenda from the emperor.
You've certainly done your share of offending the emperor. In fact, you draw a devastating picture of government in Africa, ministers living in princely mansions while the peasants and the workers live in shacks. You've talked about the corruption of democracy, the bribery, the vulgarity, the violence, the brutality, the rigged elections. Aren't you concerned that in these novels, which are gaining a growing audience in the West, that you are reinforcing the stereotypes of many Westerners toward your own people?
Well, I can see that danger. But that doesn't really bother me because I am not concerned primarily with those. I'm concerned with the people whose story I am telling. And if I'm a bit harsh, that harshness, I think, comes from concern. It is not that I hate my people or that I hate those who rule us. Even I don't even hate them. But when you look at the possibilities, the opportunities that we have squandered in a country like Nigeria, it is really so painful because so much could have been achieved, so much assistance could have been given to not just to the poor in Nigeria, but even outside of Nigeria, because Providence has been so prodigious in its gifts to a country like Nigeria. And so when you look at that the possibility and what was achieved, one feels very, very bitter indeed. Important thing to do. For the safety, I keep talking about the safety of the world. You see, people some people think I'm a troublemaker. You see, why does he raise these issues? These are uncomfortable. Yeah, uncomfortable, but I am not the one causing the trouble. It is those who are not addressing the problems that keep coming up again and again and again. As a matter of fact, some old, very highly respected Swedish critic and writer said something like, after reading my essay on Conrad, that the white people will be in trouble when there are more people like me who are talking in this way, and in other words, that I'm creating problems for people. Now, I'm the last person to want to perpetuate racism on all sides, wherever it may come.
One of the critical areas wherein the African mind was captured was through education. Young African learners were raised in one way and yet were introduced to another way in schools. Such schools, for the most part, however, were preparing the younger generation to continue to contribute to the growth and development of the West, their former colonizers. Well, Professor Chinua Achebe briefly discusses our number 9 view, Africans under Western education.
What you encountered in literature was not really supposed to be what you saw on the streets. You read about snow, for instance. You never saw, there was no way you could ever see snow, you see. And you read about daffodils and so on. These were just sounds, you see. And you came to like them. That was education. And so, and in the same way, and I think this would, to some extent, explain why I did not immediately object to Conrad, because it's just part of this, of things that really did not belong outside there in the street. It was something remote and far away, and that was education. Anything to do with the home ground was not really part of this education. You learned the geography. My sister, who was older than me, the geography they did was the geography of England. For instance, they were talking about the Vale of Evesham. You see, I mean, these were just sounds like Baghdad. Like those were distant, like Samarkand. You see, everything was very, very far and remote. But that was what gave you a job. See, so you did it.
But also.
And last, number 10, but certainly not least, we look at Professor Chinua Achebe's religious views.
Has this had any particular meaning for you, living as you do in two worlds, or between
Yes.
two worlds?
Yes, I think it is one of the central themes of my life and of my work.
Certainly of your literature.
Yes. And this is where I think the first conflict with those who came to improve us developed, or the missionaries. Because they came with the idea of one way, one truth, one life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And this is something which my people traditionally would consider so extreme, so fanatical, that they would recoil from it.
Wasn't this one of the reasons that missionaries, the colonial administrators, the Westerners have often not ever penetrated the reality of the African society, because you could embrace, the African could embrace the Christian God while still holding on to a sense of tradition, to the gods of old in one sense. Is that right?
Yes, yes, and I think it was not necessary to have thrown overboard so much that was thrown overboard in the name of Christianity or in the name of civilization. It was not necessary. I think a lot of the damage, not only to the material culture, but to the mind of the people, that we made nothing. Our thoughts were evil. Religions were not really religions. It's paganism or heathenism. And so this created a problem in the mind of the people.
And those are top 10 genius views of Professor Chinua Achebe. Do share your favorite ones. Do share which ones appeal to you, which ones you would definitely explore even further and do further research. Which ones do you disagree with, right? Which ones you've had your own experience with. Let's do engage with some of the views that he has shared. Do have an awesome, awesome day and see you next time.